Our first author, Tasha Fouts, received her BA from California State University at Long Beach, her MFA in poetry from Bowling Green State University, and his all but dissertation on her PhD in English at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her work has previously appeared in Salt Hill, Little Red, Leaves, Bateau, and other literary journals. She is passionate about many things, but especially whipped cream, a good mocha, and enormous scarves. And you'll see that tonight, at least the scarves. She works and lives in suburban Illinois, but still calls Alaska home because its wildness will always be in her heart. Tasha Fouts.
I'm setting a timer so I don't go over. I'm bad with time, so I figured I should have it next to me. Okay, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it, and thanks, Frank, for the intro. So the first set of poems that I'm going to read is actually from a set of collections about my mom's history. She's Indonesian, and to give you a little bit of context in the story, her father was murdered in the middle of the night during a revolution, and they had to escape Indonesia very quickly, my grandmother and my mom and all of her sisters and brothers. So they moved to Holland. My grandmother remarried a Dutchman, and then they ended up immigrating to the US. So it was a very tumultuous affair. She doesn't have fond memories of Indonesia. She is passionate about America and white heteronormative culture. And as such, she has a hard time talking about Indonesia, so she never gave me access to her language, her native language, or to the history of Indonesia or her history in Indonesia. So this set of poems kind of explores that. Untitled. This poem starts with hoof. My grandfather's shoes were black and cold. Everything was lost on tongues. This poem must contain chalk. My grandmother's powder is parched and spilled. Even consonants were taken. But the hard swallow of a throat meant I still carry my language. This poem ends with sash. My mother's hair is loose and streaming. A sentence is formed about roads and wind and bending trees. Thanks. This next poem is actually composed of fragments of poems of Sharil Anwar, who is an Indonesian poet. And so it's exploring kind of the bridge between Indonesian poetry and American Western poetry. It was your hands that moved fiercely. My house is built of heaped up poems. Life isn't life anymore. It's like this, silent, stiff, that's all. But let's not stop here. One day my voice will be stifled, burned in the lamp wick. I'll clutch a violent eyes, pick the wildest horse, make him run. What else can I do? You were too high a mountain. It was your hands that moved fiercely, and now there's a wound on my body widening. I can't share anyone else's fate, yet I kissed and I clung, so smash whatever I've made. Call my name, fall asleep sobbing. I will be washed ashore. I will slice clear through the heart. Look, everything's burning. This next poem is, you guys don't have to clap in these poems, it's okay. It's better if you wait till the end, maybe. This next poem is about the invasion. So when my grandfather was killed during the revolution, Indonesia was actually being colonized both by the Dutch and by the Japanese. And he was actually killed by the Japanese. So this is about kind of the Japanese invasion in which he died. After the invasion, the men stormed the beach. They took your knife and cut the trees. The men stormed the beach. They tore and opened the ground. The men stormed the beach. They grabbed fire and brandished the flame. The men stormed the beach. You were left in sand, sirens pushing you home. This forest, it took you in its lungs, held you until the boughs burned with you. My skin was sea red. We wept like birds. All right, this next one is about my mom and her unwillingness to talk about her history and kind of the effect that that had on me. Candle dance. Always your feet are dancing. There are mangoes, then silk, then chains, then shadow, then flames. But it is not your feet that burn. It is my arms and this light and this pencil I'm holding. You are just the trace of a flame that I run after, and I never know where to go from here. So I turn back, page upon page, but it's the same, your feet, your mouth, your black hair falling. It all makes me cry. I want to say you are flowers scattered in the sand, but we both know that isn't true. We both know you are vowels dying in the sun. And then the last of this set is really about the loss of language. And with the loss of language comes a loss of history. And the loss of language also inflicts like a deep trauma on the subject. So this explores that. Antler. You see, mother, burden antlers, wide furrow of loss, mouths made implicate, weird apparatus lathed in process and thought. And I cannot help but wonder, mother, if this body too must suffer the tongue's confusion of noise. So this leads into my second set of poems. And these explore, again, a little bit of the violence of language and trying to recollect and write down and what that does to memory. And it actually uses nature to kind of look at that a little bit more closely. And because a lot of these are actually meta-poetic or poems about poems, you'll hear a lot of like about writing in each of these. And one more thing, sorry. I also have like a set of turtle poems, so you'll notice that these are bookended by turtles because I like them. Poem. I waned, I forgot to speak, and from that breach lost remembering. So I built this aperture upon the turtle's beak, calculating the devotion between origin and replica. All but the image conceded to this process. How one resolves the self, how the turtle emerges brackish and muddled, how his fanning paw rushes for the mouth, figure of what? Crow. Oh, I guess before I start this one, I'll preface this also. When I'm writing, one of the things I tend to do is look up words in the dictionary and then try to make them fit together. So I use a form where it's like this poem starts with this, and then there's this, and finally there's this, to kind of see if there's some connection that I can draw. So this poem utilizes that form. Crow. This poem starts with bewildered. Two crows fixed in the yard, devotion of the sable gullet, a scatter of joint and feather. This poem admits in form. We all scratch at the page, burden of dictionary and thumb, nothing is predetermined. This poem ends with grain, one letter yoked to another, swift rise of the caw. There is no need for needling now, just a thrum of beak and maw. In a lot of these poems, there's also trouble with the idea of the image and relying on the image. So this poem explores that. Replica. Here's your image. The winter ptarmigan awash in the drifts. Can't you see his delicate tuft of wing, the rent of white tail against white snow? Ptarmigan is the Alaska state bird, and I'm from Alaska, so I have a few poems about it. And it changes colors. So in the winter, it turns white so that it blends into the snowdrifts, and then in the summer, it turns brown. And one of the features of the ptarmigan is that it has like a hairy foot. So there's like feathers along its legs, so it looks like it's wearing pantaloons, which is so dang cute. So this is another ptarmigan poem. Ptarmigan, I write this as a witness of your turnabout, a record of your hairy foot, ruckus of wing, vestigial lope. Why did the willow just end you here? How could she not love such obedience? I know the monster must attack to feed the abandon of snow, but I can hear you still. Your sound is so furious. Birds, I found out when prepping for this reading, are a huge theme in my writing. I didn't realize that until I started putting these together, but like every poem in this set has a bird. So this next poem is also about a bird, but I'm also maybe interested in sound and the way sound works, and how it can communicate. And I think birds are like very noisy animals, so I think that's why I'm attracted to them. So this one's largely, this next poem is largely about birds and the sounds they make, and how, imagistically speaking, this poem like talks about like a bird circling the sky and then like a swimmer or a fish like circling in the water below, and how we can like see those parallels. The caw of sky, two chords hewn and vibrating. Is that what marks ripples on the water? I am swimming, 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 mirror reflection of the gull, concentric circles stratified. My mouth wonders the taste of feathers, the parting wind, heavy downbeat, rustle. Have I always been so hungry? This life, a tease of web. And this is my 3-poem warning. So we've got 3 more left, but mine are all short. Okay, so this next one is actually really new. I wrote it for one of my writers groups. I'm in a couple different writers groups, and I wrote it this morning, so it's super duper new. But we had to use a few different words. Rutabaga was one of them. And it's such a pratfall word, right? So like when you say rutabaga, you think of like just someone falling because it's such a silly word. So I take it seriously though. So this is my rutabaga poem. To dismantle the self. The way the snake bird submerges in water. Heresy of the eye's promise. You hope for an unhinged jaw and a dark death cave. But 3,000 miles into this Floridian coast, that fish is speared. What is it that we troll for? Even the rutabaga finds splendor on the plate. And then this one I wrote in Seattle. My family is from the West Coast, so I have a lot of West Coast imagery. Song of dispersal. Well before daybreak, go to the water. Wend your way through pines, past ferns, down around mossy boulders. Pause only when the sliced pavement meets the mud, meets the stones, meets the rain, meets the waves, and look up. Do not be distracted by the birds of the sound, tiny hearts bobbing on the water, buoys of hunger. Instead, fix your eyes to where the ocean is the sky, where in this morning twilight blue fades to blue and the splinter of the horizon has yet to break the day. Find in this life's resolve, tides of erasure. This is what it is to know the self. This is what it is to know the day. And then finally, a turtle poem. It is written, in the end, strange letters will knot me to this page. Palimpsest of turtle and graphite, tangle of form and scratch. Shapes will be yoked to you. But I wish that it were the plume of a wave, the whip and curl, argent giddiness of the escaped breath, that it all could just be the chaos of sound. Thanks.
Now's your chance to talk to a poet.